as a sort of update here, we have the daunting task of giving you a complete or as much complete donor update of all major developments of the last 3 months and the likely outlook for the remainder of the year in the space of about 40-ish minutes. That's a lot of information. We still want to get 20 minutes down for the questions, and we have a hard finish at the end of the hour. I think that's all the admin sorted, right? Let's kick it off. First of all, most of you know us. MZN is a social enterprise. We're here to build better nonprofit organizations, securing funds and building smarter strategies. And a lot of our particular training services these days are subsidized, as our mission is to build ever stronger NGOs. My name is Chris. I'm the managing director and founder of MZN. Currently in Bucharest, normally based in Hamburg. And I myself work with a lot of NGOs on their strategy and their organizational development. I'm joined by my wonderful colleagues who will introduce themselves in a second. Tonya, do you want to make a start? Because I got your picture right next to mine.
Yes, I can. Hello, everyone. My name is Tonya Robinson Beck. I'm a consultant here at MZN International. And as it pertains to this presentation, I will be presenting a little later. It's very, very nice to meet and see all of you.
Fantastic. Next in my picture, I got Smithy.
Hello, everyone. I'm Smriti. I'm from India, and I'm working as an analyst at MZN. And currently, I'm based in Leipzig, Germany. And so happy to see you all here. Thank you so much for attending our webinar.
Fantastic. And then just going down from left to right, Betty Gül.
Hello, everyone. I'm Betty Gül Özman, and I'm joining the webinar from Berlin, Germany. And happy to see you all, and thank you for joining us. I will be talking about the specific country fundings today. Thank you.
And last but by no means least, but also the most South member of the team, Nicole.
Thanks, Chris. Hello, everyone. I am Nicole Jennings, originally from Zimbabwe, but dialing in from Cape Town in South Africa. And I will be telling you a little bit about our training courses at the end of this presentation. I'm looking forward to it.
Super. So as I said to you, let's dive right in. The task we have here today is to give you a brief and a pragmatic overview. So we would like to give you a quick reminder of a reminder of the remainder of the outlook of 2024, what is going on in the donor world, have a brief look at the major trends and in particular how they may have changed over the last 3-4 months and what change we expect, and where we can provide a little bit of guidance for these key donors where our work with these donors has shown us over the last few years, in particular focusing on the last 3 months, 4 months, that they may appreciate a particular positioning or particular guidance on here where we can. That is, of course, held very generally. If you are an MZN partner, then you will have that particular guidance note in your regular funding updates. Anyway, let's dive in. We are sort of reaching a little bit of tipping point nonetheless. There's lots of donor nations who are likely to turn themselves inwards faster, slashing aid budgets faster, particularly in the UK and the US. We're expecting that to be the case, particularly with the US elections coming up in early November. However, what unifies the OSCE donors is that market-based solutions are really high in demand. It's possibly that they are a reaction to tax-funded budgets being slashed and more impact investors, venture philanthropists, and other market-based solutions demanded being more. But they are still very rare. The adoption rate within the MZN partners and other NGOs is not there yet to the degree that we want. And all of that is happening in front of a background that is just way more fragile. As per recent figures, about 300 million people live off and actively need humanitarian assistance. And a whopping quarter of the world's population now live in these fragile environments. That is increasing. The situation is getting more dire. And obviously, the SDGs are nowhere near where we want them to be. So the situation is pretty severe here. And all of that is affected also by a change in how development is done. And purely from our perception, that change is speeding up. Artificial intelligence in aid is speeding up program delivery. We're having the first few programs having been launched over the last 6 months or so, where AI is not an interesting component, but a central one in program delivery. And the same can be said about innovative finance mechanisms. They're really gaining speed. So back to those market-based solutions, we have more and more mixed funded programs where donors, philanthropists, impact investors, and traditional channels of charity funds come together to deliver various aspects of one program. That makes program management at least more interesting, put it this way. So these developments are speeding up in our view. If we're looking at the donor world in particular, we have written a few donor agencies. Obviously, we can't focus on every single one, but here's, let's start with the single largest one, the United States Agency for International Development. It's still very focused on localization. It issued a localization report recently and mentioned severe challenges beyond health. My colleague later will look a little bit at this in more detail. The goals by 2025 remain to have localized 25% of their funding to local actors, and 50% of that should be locally led by 2030. There has been an increase in localization in budget, but mainly in health. Looking over to our side of the big pond, the UK Foreign Commission and the Development Office, the FCDO, they have fundamentally changed how they account for overseas development allocation, resulting in an overall budget cut. They still face a lot of focus a lot on the Ukrainian refugee influx, which reduces additional traditional aid spending. And if we look at the funds coming from the news coming from the UK and the news the new government makes recently about the highly deficit budget, I think it would be unreasonable to expect any material increases, or even we'd be happy if they maintain the aid budget for the foreseeable future. In fact, most pessimistic voices expect a further reduction here. Going over the channel to Germany, my home country, they're also driving forward a much less ambitious but constantly implemented and long-standing localization strategy, and they do that via country-based pool funds. That's interesting. We can talk about this later as well. My colleague will look into that. They do this basically by increasing agility in the GIZ or the BMZ, allowing decision-making to be made more locally. They've also slightly increased their budget, which is nice to hear. But the challenge to all that is that there's still significant funding that goes to large UN agencies like the World Food Programme or UNHCR, and that sort of unhinges or hinders localization to a degree. That is acknowledged, and as my colleague will mention later, we're expecting a new GIZ strategy over the next few months, and we're expecting that challenge to be explicitly talked about. UN agencies at large, you may remember from our last quarterly funding feedback, they are still driving down the Nexus approach, so making sure that there is interagency coordination with this triple nexus, humanitarian aid, development, and peace. That continues to be driven forward with some really good progress in between some agencies. Obviously, there are operational problems within most UN agencies now, in that the manpower is just so stretched that strategic thinking or having the calm to really act, not just react, is sometimes severely missed, as our friends and colleagues at the UN tell us ourselves. Looking at the European Union, that's the ECHO and or the development stuff, the focus areas written down there remain the same. There's heavy investments going in and more investments for Ukrainian, but also from others. We have an update for you there later, or I have. Not much change there. except that the EU elections have managed, the Commission elections have managed to be very uneventful, which is good news, to have some consistency there. That's a very brief update here. There is a lot of change, however, with these donors. So having a quick look at these ones again, and more looking at the funding side of it, the USAID has publicly said they need to revert the trend on localization. We'll hear about this later. This is beyond health, not really happening just yet. The UK FCDO said what you see here about cutting core municipal multilateral funding, but protecting operational. That's a diplomatic language that we expect for more cuts to happening here. The Germany has finally finalized its 2025 budget, where it maintained BMZ and Foreign Office funding despite these pressures for further cuts. So we're not expecting for the time being funding from the third largest donor, Germany, to be cut significantly any further. Development banks, so looking at the World Bank or the other IFIs, they are really driving development agendas right now, mainly. I think this is because we see more and more development banks taking over what has previously been the themes of straightforward donors like the UK FCDO, or formerly DFID and USAID, or GIZ in Germany. And development banks taking center stage here in the discussions, in the conferences, as these the donors are facing more and more focus on humanitarian crises. An interesting development we reported for the first time in the last quarterly update, what is really the remarkable increase in what we call venture philanthropists and impact investors. These now exceed the funds of bilateral donors. And this is something that I think many NGOs are not even aware of, don't know how to make their programs investable. They're still tackling with the day-to-day crisis and with the localization channel. I think that will have a major influence over the next few years. And I think that there will be winners and losers to that development. It's obviously a major opportunity for funding diversification. And then finally, I want to share with you a wonderful quote. A partner of the country director of a partner of us in Kenya has sort of given me in a conversation earlier this year. And he said that a noble cause like ours without the financial resilience is like a promise without the power to deliver. And I really thought that summarized it down of what we feel so often. And I hope that this webinar helps a little bit. There are some principles, and I told you that we would give you some guidance. There are some principles which we can share with you. We've summarized them here. I'm not going to read them all out, just to pick two. When we looked at our partner NGOs around the world, and with whom we've worked for 2 or 3 years, we find that those who are successful have the staying power, but they also end up working by increasing their income through simple, strong pipeline management. It takes longer than one would expect, but that pipeline management, the advance notice, the pre-positioning, taking the rush out of proposal development, has a major impact on the win rate. I think that is easily said and easily forgotten. Similarly, in a similar sort of management way, we find that using flagship programs or signature programs can really materially drive down the individual proposal costs. And that, again, with those who we work with for 2-3 years' time, has significantly reduced costs on the individual proposal and increased the win rate over these flagship programs, because you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. There's more here, and these funding principles will be shared with you once again. If you want to discuss them in more detail, please reach out. But those, obviously there's more to this, but for the purpose of this webinar, I think it's a decent summary of where we are seeing success within our NGO partners. And oops, I'm sorry, I'm just realizing that the slideshow is breaking. And I think I'm handing over the first few donor-specific ones to my colleague, Tony Ann. Is that right, Tony Ann?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you so much, Chris. So we will dive into more specifically USAID trends, macro and micro trends. So to begin, we've been speaking about localization, and this is the agency's intent to build community-led development. So this means CSOs within communities in need get the funding and the support from USAID. There's also a push towards more impact investments, private capital mobilization, and there is a linkage between this and private sector engagement. So the agency is trying to push more forward towards engaging more private sector-led organizations to support international non-developmental global organizations. There's also a focus on co-creation. And what this means is that USAID in particular is more intent on collaborating or for collaboration with interested CSOs and NGOs, where they want to get a more up-close and in-depth look at the projects that will be a perspective for support. And this can either be with the agency itself or with target communities or beneficiaries, and the results from these sessions can be outlined to the donors. At the macro level, we're looking at moderately increasing public budgets. So this means that over the past couple of years, donor budgets have just increased minimally. For example, DAC donor budgets have only increased by 5% since 2022. There are better increases in foundation budgets. Foundations and private philanthropists funding increased by 15%. We have an upcoming top 100 foundation list, should be available for download in April 2025, and afterwards you can register your interest. As it pertains to venture philanthropy and impact investments, we see that there has been a drop in impact investments during 2023, but simultaneously there has been an increase in investments to developing countries. This has increased by 23% in 2022. And we encourage everyone, if they have investment pitches, they can submit it afterwards, and we will relate to prospective investors. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Thank you. So we'll look at some other trends that have become more popular. We have talked about localization before. We also have USAID focusing more on reducing compliance burdens for prospective implementing partners. This is to increase their competitiveness for partnership opportunities, as well as cutting down on time burdens. This also relates to capacity strengthening for local organizations, as well as international NGOs. As it pertains to the thematic focus, there is a focus on accelerating climate action, private sector engagement, as was said before, building and expanding digital programs. In fact, there is about 90 million USD, a portion for USAID to focus on digital program expansion. And they also want to look at food security challenges. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Tonian.
Thank you. As it pertains to other latest news, we have what we call Innovation Incentive Awards, and these are awards given to select organizations who have achieved specified development outcomes. So it's a competition, and the prize reward is USD 500,000 to 1 million. Separate and apart from the incentive awards, we have some other challenges where select organizations have received funding or prize rewards. You have Artisanal Mining Challenge, the Grand Challenges Award, and Challenge.gov. As it pertains to the national focus of USAID, there is a focus in Sudan. They have apportioned between 500,000 to a little under $1 million for supporting humanitarian aid efforts in Sudan, as well as launching a partner liaison security operation. Next slide, please.
Interesting.
Thank you. So as it pertains to the fiscal year 2025 and their budget prospects, There is 42 billion that's available for receipt. And this includes 28 billion for foreign assistance for USAID fully and partially managed accounts. The focus areas will include Russia's strategic failure in Ukraine, support of people in the Middle East, and for that specific opportunity, there is about 2 billion being apportioned for that, as well as investments in the Indo-Pacific region, and that amount is roughly about 2 billion as well. Okay, so
Tonya,
go ahead.
Would you mind if I add? I spoke to a colleague at USAID week before last, and he gave me permission to share this as well. Sort of said there is an additional funding request, and there's a lot of activity going on at USAID, not just in Washington, but elsewhere as well, around sort of Trump-proofing the budget. So that should the elections go the way we all fear, or we hope, or other than the way we hope, that at least for the first year or a year and a half or so, cutting and slashing that budget will be operationally very difficult. So that is going on in the background. Maybe that answers some questions here of people.
Thank you so much for that insight, Chris. I think that's the end of my presentation, and it's over to you.
Is it back to me? Okay. Yeah, EU, of course. Yes. Thank you very much, Tonya. And so the EU has had a quiet summer and a busy time leading up to it. The ECHO budget, remember the EU ECHO budget, the European Office for Humanitarian Development and Humanitarian Affairs Office, has had a marginal, as you said, Tonya, a marginal increase from 2023 from 1.7 billion to 1.8. That's probably just the inflation adjustment, frankly. However, in the allocations, it has changed over the last 6 months or so. In terms of geographic allocations, we have an increase by nearly just over half a billion, 513 million increase of allocation to Africa, Middle East and North Africa. This means SSA, by the way, Sub-Saharan Africa, by the way, we should have specified that. Middle East and North Africa has also received an increase of nearly 400 million to 470. So that allocation has increased quite significantly, whereas the money has to come from somewhere, of course. Southeast Europe and the neighborhood policy has reduced, has been slashed by about 200 million down to 115 million over the last few months. That is partially, however, because a lot of neighborhood policies are being now paid for by other pots, particularly the focus on Ukraine, for example, and the surrounding area and Southeast Europe has been partially moved to other EU funds. For us NGOs, for us who apply for that funding, it makes a big difference because we now need to apply to a different agency for sometimes new programs. And we have MZN partners that have great experience with ECHO, and suddenly they need to apply to a whole other agency within the European Union. So that can be somewhat interesting. Like your US donors, Tonya, Europe has also provided nearly 900 million for humanitarian and aid development on Sudan, trying to avert the terrible crisis that is going on there. So sort of in summary, there is emphasis of the EU's commitment to these immediate crises and this again, looking at immediate response to conflict and climate affected regions, which again means that those organizations of you that work more in the development space or in the peace space may need to look more towards the development banks and the other donors out there, because even operationally, the traditional donors tend to be quite busy on crisis, conflict, and emergency affected regions. Sorry, that's the same thing. There we are. So having a look into the next year, we've had a few conversations there, and very limited information is out there, but there are some trends which you can already read from those conversations. There continues to be a slight increase for 2025. We're probably going to 2 billion or so, 1.92 billion or something. We continue to be driven, focused mainly to conflict, climate change, and addressing the root causes of geopolitical instability. There is a good focus of greater focus and certain impatience of finally getting to these root causes and blending humanitarian and development aid for long-term resilience. If we look at Sudan, for example, there was a lot of notes to that allocation saying, if you work in Sudan, your proposals really need to demonstrate that there is not just a response element, but also a development and long-term resilience. So in that nexus of humanitarian aid, development, and peace. The climate change focus continues, particularly in vulnerable regions like Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and Pacific. Here we get more and more interest in nature-based solutions and in disaster-resilient infrastructure, because as you may have noticed, the conversation is about more and more about building infrastructure, common good infrastructure that can survive the next flooding, the next climate catastrophe. I'm not going to read it all out. The private sector role, equally to your US donor, Tony-Ann, is getting more and more attention with a growing emphasis on the private sector. We're hearing that as well, that for the next EU Development Days in 2025 conference, there's a particular pitch to align with and coordinate with impact investors, private sector engagement for these market-based solutions. So in summary, on the EU side next year, we are expecting a sort of steadily increase in the funding, a strong focus on climate and integration into market-based solutions. Sort of a big overlap to the US, right, Tony-Ann? That seems not entirely happening in a bubble, at least. Moving on, I'm not going to read out this very interestingly designed slide, but here are for those who want to read up on this later. We've got 6-7 specific allocations made over the last few months from the EU budget, just to focus on one. There's the other 546 million for Southern Africa, looking on food insecurity and displacement. That is fairly newly allocated. Or if we just randomly pick another one, the Middle East and North Africa, we have another 470 million set for conflict affected populations, again, displacement, lots of health and education focus here, or indeed the 900 million I've mentioned earlier to Sudan for agricultural support. That's been big, obviously, to ensure that the harvest there is better next year than it was this year. These are all allocations from the current budget, and some are new, as we said, some are just allocations in response to rising humanitarian needs. I think that is the point where my colleague takes over and talks about which foundations were the most active in the last few months. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Chris.
Thanks,
so you can see here's the list of 10 philanthropic foundations. This list is published almost every year, and the latest data we derived is from 2022. By the way, these are the most active foundations in 2024 as well. So according to this data, 3 organizations made it to 2022, which were not present in 2021. They are Rockefeller Foundation, Lego Foundation, and Bezos Earth Fund. And if we talk in monetary terms, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation had seen a dip in funding from $7.5 billion in 2021 to $6.5 billion in 2022. But we are actually expecting some substantial change in funding from this foundation in 2025. On the other hand, some of the foundations also increased their funding in 2022. For example, CIFF had increased up to 4.9%, Rockefeller up to 5.5%, and Wellcome Foundation up to 20.3%, which is a very good hike, actually, hike in funding. Can we change the slide, please?
Sorry.
No.
There we go.
Thank you. So, yeah, if we talk about German aid, we are actually expecting their new strategy for 2025 soon. And GIZ focus on agility is also expected in their new strategy, especially in the areas of climate change, pandemic, and political stability. Priority will also be given to digital and data-driven transformation, it is also expected that GIZ will prioritize climate adaptation and mitigation project looking at recent climate change issues in the world. Their focus is also on resilience and crisis management in health and pandemic, where they are trying to mirror the USAID approach. Making partnership and alliance with international organizations and private sector was always in their priority, and they are focusing on continuing it in 2025. It is also expected that the revenues will go slightly up for the next year. And now I have finished my slides, so I will pass the mic to Vertigo.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. There we are. And that's...
Thank you, Simriti. So large funding allocations are there for from countries like India, Switzerland, and they are allocated to various United Nations agencies. There was a new Africa strategy unveiled, focusing on economic ties and green energy and security, and that totaled around $700 million. So to start with, I will go to India first. The government pledged 2.5 million to United Nations Relief and Works Agency for the Palestinian refugees. And this aims to provide essential relief and rehabilitation to the refugees. So if we go on to Switzerland, who has pledged around $1 million for to the UN refugee agency, which is UNHCR, for the efforts in Iraq. And this is mainly for displaced Iraqis and Iraqis who are at risk of statelessness. So the next should be Italy, I think.
Yep.
So Italy pledged the funding to United Nations World Food Programme, and it totals around 12 million euros, which is quite high. And this will have families in Gaza for crucial food supplies. And next we go to the Middle East. State of Qatar is providing $25 million to United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees. And this is again for human development and humanitarian activities, as Chris and Tony Ann mentioned over and over, that this is the focus, and we see that here in Qatar as well. Continuing on is a program which is different than all others, which is started by France's AFD, which stands for actually Financial Development Agency, which aims to contribute to social and economic development all over the world. And this is to cover the issue of migration in Africa. And they are focusing on particular countries: Ivory Coast, Jordan, Lebanon, Madagascar, Senegal, and Tunisia. And the budget is between 300,000 euros to 550,000 euros. And it's for 3 years, and it starts this year. And the last but not least, there's a new Norwegian strategy which is unveiled on Africa. And the total budget is around $700 million. And it started in this year. And it will be focusing mostly on economic cooperation, climate change, security and peace building, and also development cooperations. And as I said at the beginning of my presentation, it will be focused mostly on economic ties, green energy, security, which aligns with the Norway's international goals. So this is all from me, and I would like to give the floor to Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you, Vertigo. Much appreciated.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thank you to my colleagues for such an interesting presentation. I'll just take a few moments just to tell you a little bit about our training courses. We've recently launched our online training courses in right-winning proposals and sustainable income for NGOs. We have a cohort that's actually starting on Monday. So if anyone is interested in joining that cohort, you're very welcome to reach out to me or to have a look on our website. Chris, if you can go to the next slide, please.
Yep.
We also have a number of in-person courses that we offer. We currently have a course taking place in London for our right-winning proposals training course. It's been an exciting few days for the participants on that course. We have our last in-person training course in Berlin in November. So if you are available for that course, feel free to reach out. We'd love to have you on that training. And we're putting together our 2025 calendar. So keep an eye on our website for some exciting trainings globally in 2025, as well as some new courses that are on the horizon that MZN feels are really, really important for our community and our space. Chris, I think the next slide, please. Yeah, really just some information. Obviously, as mentioned, this PowerPoint will be shared with everyone, as well as the recording, but you can reach out to us with this contact information. And then I think the last slide is just around our next webinar, which is due on the 11th of September. So we hope that you've enjoyed this one, and please feel free to sign up for our next one on how to get donor mapping right. We look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
Chris.
Nicole. Thank you. As a German here of the round, I am extremely pleased. It is now exactly to the minute, 40 minutes since this webinar started, which means we have 20 minutes as promised for Q&A of 15 minutes or so. That is pleasing me no end. I shall stop the slide share so you can see us better and move over to the questions. So if you've got any more questions from this, if you want to dive into any donor deeper, then please put them in the Q&A, and I'm just sort of putting them to whoever is the expert on the question in particular. Tony, did you have a time to scan the questions already? I didn't really.
Yes, I did. We have 7
fantastic.
questions in the chat, in the Q&A chat. And I think we can just jump right in. So the first question is from Anders Jacobson, and they are asking if you could share a bit about the HUM funding from the EU, and that is different from the ECHO funding.
So actually, I'm presumably meaning humanitarian funding.
Okay.
I assume, Anders. I don't know. Anders, would you mind sort of making your question a little bit more specific when we get around to it? The majority of humanitarian funding and the agency specifically set up, as I presume you know, with the EU is the ECHO agency. But there are, because the EU is focusing so much more on the development piece and aid nexus, there are other agencies, there are other budgets and allocations that sort of work in what is traditionally considered the humanitarian space. So, for example, there's the agency looking at the budget allocation, the budget allocation and the neighborhood policy, INTPA, and INTPA looking on infrastructure development that is now giving out cash transfers for workers on an infrastructure disaster with an infrastructure project in Madagascar. That is, for example, something that would ordinarily be associated with ECHO because of giving cash transfers. That are things that makes if you're looking at humanitarian funding only, then ECHO is certainly your biggest agency in Europe, but there are pockets of allocations with other agencies like INPA and under the neighborhood policy, where you can find interesting funding that requires a deep understanding of how the EU works and a constant monitoring, which can be burdensome. But if you're looking at any particular funding, Anders, I would encourage you to sort of reach out, and I'll ask my colleagues on the EU desk, etc., and the EU people from which funding would be applicable to you.
Well, they did provide some clarification, and it states from the EU delegation in Uganda, they have learned that they had a significant humanitarian funding, and they're now trying to find out how it works. If that's
okay.
clearer for you.
utilization in Uganda. Okay, I would not know top of my head, but we would definitely need could be able to find out. So if you provide your email, then we'll get back to you.
Okay. Well, the questions are coming in now, which is great. We have 12 now, up from the 9 before. So the second question is from an anonymous attendee, and they are asking what exactly is meant by effective pipeline management.
Tonya, would you like to take this, or shall I?
You can go ahead.
Oh, thanks. You take the next one then.
Of course.
So if we imagine a proposal to a funding secured as a simple pipeline, starting from the origination of the program to matching with donors, to monitoring calls and releases for call that funding, to producing the concept note, the proposal, the negotiation phase, ultimately, hopefully the award. All that takes management. And because no funding call or no programmatic call is ever the same, you end up having these overlapping pipelines. So for example, we just spoke about EU funding. Uganda, for example, has a different dynamic to EU funding in Kenya or EU funding in Asia, and definitely different dynamic to USAID funding in even the same country. So fine tuning and managing that pipeline is very simple, actually. It's not very complicated, but making that really monitoring this, setting KPIs in there is really, really important. And just one tip, for example, we worked with one organization for 4 years. It's only last year that we've gotten deep enough to work with each other, where we set up KPIs, measured the likelihood of a successful proposal at various stages, from this origination to proposal submission status. And these the forecast figures got better and better over that from year 3 to year 4, and that reduced the overall amount of proposals they need to send and increase the success rate because they just got better around pipeline management. Give me some feedback, Tony. And did I sort of describe that right, or am I too much in my jargon?
Very comprehensively, but simple, I think. Cool. So the anonymous attendee will have to tell us if they understood or they need further clarification.
I've got one for you then, or for anybody here. So I'm not just the one answering the questions, because that's the dynamic which I'm gonna counter.
I will answer the next 3 because
go for it.
USAID focused.
Okay, fine. That's your area.
Okay, so the next question is from Alana, and she's asking if we can provide any additional information on the countries of priority for the USAID $2 billion focused in the Middle East. So yes, Alana, actually it's the US government is providing about $7 billion for the region. $2 billion is focused, is from USAID funding. So that's a distinction there. And there wasn't any great distinction in the countries that would be supported. It can be assumed that it's covering the entire region. Jordan was mentioned, support for Jordan, as well as to address the effects of conflicts. So that could be in Gaza, for example, the Israel-Palestine conflict, and any other areas where there are tensions arising, if that answered the question. So please let me know in the chat if you need further clarification. Anything you would like to add, Chris?
No, I think that 2 million allocation came from the existing already earmarked budget. So Gaza and West Bank obviously continue to receive sort of a very, very targeted humanitarian assistance through other allocations that were designed to address sort of unique and pressing needs, and they just allocated that. I don't think programmatically there's anything different. I know they're trying to target it more and more, and the situation is extremely fluid there. I think just last week, another few tens millions, I think there was 25 million got redirected from one place, from one program in Gaza to something else in Gaza. So these situations happen a lot. So, you know it, you do it. Daily monitoring is almost essential.
Okay, thank you for that insight. The next question is from Merva, and they are asking, how do we track non-traditional donors? So I can give like a brief overview. Chris can jump in, or one of the analysts can also jump in. So usually how we go about tracking donors in general is that we do a very cursory search on the main funding information website. So your DevEx and other such websites. We also employ a collaborative approach with our clients. So we keep in close communication with them. They also have their ears on the ground, and they can pick up opportunities that would be more aligned to their implementation efforts and how innovative and unique these funding opportunities can be. In addition, we also have relationships with persons outside of our clients or general network, and we also keep our ear on the ground where that is concerned. Yeah, I think that's just a very quick overview. Chris can add a few more points if needed.
Yeah, it's so what we do a lot is we submit we go through our CRM system or a customer relationship system, and you can only do this at scale, and it's very intense, I admit. So it's difficult to do as an individual organization, but we often submit a concept note or proposal to a donor on behalf of one of our NGO partners. That it's successful, or it may not be successful at times. And even if it is, we then are in conversation with the donor, and we say, okay, we see that you've allocated this portion to this. What about the other problem? They say, yeah, that's another call coming out in 6 months' time to set out the supply chain around the agriculture project we've just funded, for example, with you. So they're timing it. Or we very often submit questions with relates to strategy updates, saying, oh, USAID, we noted that you have progress in localization on health, and everything else localization didn't quite go on. And they are actually giving sometimes the press office releases, or sometimes we're getting real conversations saying, yeah, we need to focus more and more on there. And towards the end of the year, finally, there are these must-have the use it or lose it budgets. So in the next quarter, having more of those where we simply ask our donor contacts, we're saying, hey, I noticed you haven't spent, or you've significantly underspent on this or that, particularly after the summer. So I assume in the next 4 months, this funding will finally come out of the works into the procurement phase. And we tend to get a delayed but decent response on that. So it's a lot of work, a lot of CRM, and then obviously the conferences, they help.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. I think you answered the question very succinctly, but as always, if there's need for further clarification, please put it in the chat. The next question is from another anonymous attendee, and they're asking, how do they get the top 100 foundation list? So,
ooh, Smitty knows exactly how to get them. You've just put one online, didn't you?
Yes, you can also look at AMZN page where we upload area-specific organizations working in, for example, climate, and you can buy those only for like 150 euros. So I think you can easily get it through. Apart from that, if we are looking at top 10 donors in philanthropy or something, we can always follow DAVEX, for example. They always publish top 10 donors. Yeah. Thank you, Chris.
I just found the list, I believe. On the website, there is a link. Actually, I'm not quite sure where they are either. You know that? Well, okay. Well, they're on the website, on the donor list somewhere. Sorry.
Yeah, we can share the link instead, so it will be easier for all
that might be easier. Thank you. Before I accidentally cancel this webinar.
Okay, thank you, Smitty and Chris. The next question is a bit specific. It's asking how they can engage international donors for support, and how do they build their local networks? I think I may have not gotten the essence of this question. So Shah, if you can provide some further clarification, that would be very, very welcome. But from my end, if, for example, you want to access USAID funding, the best place to start would be their country cooperation development strategy. So they have one for different countries, usually most countries within a continent. You'd have to check to make sure your country is there. Bangladesh is included. They also do it from a regional standpoint. So you can check within the country or within the region if they cover, what is this, access to land rights and agrarian reform. For smaller NGOs, they have a new partnership initiative, which basically centralizes this localization aspect that we've been speaking about. So you can go on the website. We can share the link here as well, and you can take a look. Separate and apart from that, you can sign up for their webinars. So they have a web page that strictly focuses on tutorials for how you can work with USAID. You can reach out to the embassy or country mission for USAID in the country if one exists, and see how best you can collaborate. But they're very, very welcoming to smaller, local, community-focused organizations. Anything you'd like to add, Chris?
No, I think you've covered it very well off. USAID is trying to reduce the burden of working with USAID, but I would like to dampen expectations a little bit, because there's this one side of USAID which wants to go really local and which wants to, is fully, all of them, we are all convinced actually that local problems should be addressed by local experts and people affected by the problem. I think there's consensus around that. There's hard data about this as well. But the problem is with USAID and other donors are the financials, because there's still legislation in here which makes it difficult to localize, which makes reporting requirements extremely onerous. I've had situations recently where a significant award to a local NGO couldn't go through because they would then manage the US money to above a certain threshold. I'm not at liberty to say how much. And the rules and regulations by the federal government require for that budget to be managed by a US American citizen. So it's a simple legal problem that isn't the problem here that limits localization, or the procurement process has to be has to come under needs to be written out for all, not just local organizations, but all American organizations as well. So the procurement rules are not as localized yet either. So there are limitations and problems and challenges with that. I think sometimes if we are a bit skeptical, and if we allow ourselves to be a little bit ironic about it, don't take me too serious here, but we all, there's good consensus to localize the solution, but we don't have the systems and the attitude yet to localize the risk and truly letting go. I think that's still a problem.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have 5 minutes remaining. So unfortunately, I won't get to access or answer quite a few of these questions, but as stated before, we'll try to send responses to your email address, and you can also send further questions to our email addresses and we will answer.
And can I just also say that some of these questions I'm skim reading here, there's some good content on the website under Insights where these are covered, so that might help a little.
Okay. Is there any question within the list that you would like to tackle right now that's not covered by Insights on the website?
I mean, yeah, there's one question: what's the best way to access impact investors? I think we've done very little here on that one so far. Obviously, impact investors do not go through some sort of procurement call. They're opportunistic by very nature. They see an opportunity, they invest it, and they do. And just to let everybody know, there's not the impact investor. There's one which wants a healthy return alongside doing some good, and then there are those who want to do primarily good, but they would like to get some return still, or even just to preserve their capital. So there's a great sort of bandwidth of impact investors reaching from the hawkish to the philanthropists, really. That's the given for us. And the number one I would say to anybody who's interested in that side of funding is to have an investable project. that is still a major problem. One of the many requirements of making a project investable or even insurable later, but investable first, is to make sure that there is a revenue stream. Now, if you work in some sectors like humanitarian aid, that's just not going to happen. That's humanitarian aid is always going to be grant funded. That's probably a good thing. But if we look at agriculture or at infrastructure or at many other areas, even education, media work, and there is a revenue factor, economic empowerment, for example, financial inclusion, all that stuff that NGOs worked on with working and partnering with the private sector can be better positioned and get better rewritten to make it appealing to impact investors. So if you do have an idea, if you do have a pitch, let us know. You can upload it to the website as well. We look at them, we relay them back to our impact investor circles every month. We have a few calls there, and then we see who's coming up with that, who's interested in funding it. We do also actively approach investors. So if we know that an impact investor has funded, real life example, an agriculture project in Namibia, they're probably also interested in another agriculture project in a neighboring country in South Africa or in other neighboring country now. And that's a conversation we then end up having.
Okay. So I believe we have 2 minutes left. So I guess that's enough time for closing remarks. And, to say goodbye.
You go ahead. What's your closing remark? Diving more into USAID now?
Well, I would like to kind of point out that based on what you were saying before, that it's very complex in navigating, even though they have attempted to make the process a little simpler, that there are abundance of resources available that can support your process in working with the organization. If you decide that you wish to access these resources, we have them available. Either you contact us directly, or possibly we can put it on the website at some point, Chris, maybe,
Sure.
just for ease of access. Yeah, and it's been a very illuminating session. I enjoyed the presentation and interacting with everybody and answering questions. And thank you again, and have a great rest of day. I'm not sure where everyone is.
Thank you very much from my side as well, my colleagues. And I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar, a training that Nicole is organizing, or indeed, if you are an MZN partner already, we'll speak probably next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.